Welcome to Fine Line Station, where I read out letters and emails sent by you, the listeners. They are real-life stories about the uncanny, the creepy, and the unknown. I am your host, Charlie Fox, and I hope you're ready to tune in. Happy holidays, everyone! Today we have an email sent in by Laura. She wishes for me to share her story about someone she lost in her life and the trouble she has gone through to try and find them again. It's an interesting one. I never realized how many meanings the word lost can have. We all feel it in some ways or another throughout our lives, and maybe someone out there listening can relate to Laura. Or maybe you are the one who Laura is trying to find. So, with that, let's take a wander through Laura's story. I lost someone once. Well, I've lost more than one person in my life. The unfortunate passing of a grandparent or losing communication with a friend that you are likely to never see again. Loss is an interesting word that has so many different meanings. It can mean losing an important object, maybe left somewhere unexpected or dropped on your morning walk, losing an opportunity because you were too late to take it up, or even forgetting a memory can mean it's lost forever. Memories have been passed down through many different ways: music, storytelling, cultural stories and traditions. Nowadays we have something older generations didn't: technology and its constant improvements. We started with the film cameras with 12 or 24 shots and moved to phones where we can take hundreds without blinking an eye. We naturally want to archive and remember our past, and technology is a really easy way to record that. At least that's the idea. How often do you actually look back through your memories, photos or blog and social posts? Occasionally I would look back at trip photos or search through them for a specific memory, but otherwise they are left mostly untouched on my computer. But it's still nice knowing it's there, I suppose. I grew up with quite a decent memory. You could even call it extraordinary when it came to remembering the people I'd met in my life and the conversations we had. My parents wondered if I had an eidetic memory, but I couldn't really hold other information nearly as well as I did people's faces and their impressions and words. Like many things, I assumed kids my age could do what I could, and it would sometimes lead to arguments where I was sure they had said a certain sentence and they got annoyed saying they hadn't. I quickly realized this was an unusual quirk I had and to be more mindful of it. At one point, I pondered about people who didn't have great memories and sometimes forgot conversations or even the everyday people they passed by. Did it stress them out, knowing that a conversation could disappear so quickly from your mind? But I suppose even with a poor memory, you do tend to keep the feelings associated with the interaction, which is probably more important than any specifics. I have to give a bit of backstory before I get into who exactly I lost, but I promise it's relevant. I remember the first time I truly lost something. I was about 5 years old when I lost a journal I had spent that past month drawing in and using to practice writing. It had been a gift from my grandparents when I first joined kindergarten. It was a gorgeous thing, A5 with thick pages that could hold paint, with a blue cloth-bound cover that was covered in different coloured beads in the shapes of native birds. They explained I could use it to hold fun memories I made with friends and fill the pages with life. I remember being a bit skeptical. I had wanted a toy instead, but I grew to love that book and would spend lunchtimes filling it up with friends and reading it over in the evening. When I first noticed it missing, we looked all around the house. We then asked my teachers if they'd seen it, and even checked some of the local parks I often visited, but there was no luck at all. It was lost. Time moved on, as it does. I was very upset for a while, but after getting back into the swing of being a busy young kid and getting both toys and a new book replacement from my parents, life went on. I continued playing with my friends at kindy, moved on into primary school and continued on to high school. I still had my great memory of people and conversations, but was much better at not focusing on it too hard. Well, at least that was until I couldn't properly remember someone. Mind you, I'm not like a genius or anything, so of course I do forget some people and whatever we spoke of. unimportant things that for whatever reason I don't see as necessary. Casual chats with a barista or a boring story bleeding into a lecture from my dad. What I really kept were faces, names, and any conversation that I paid full attention to and deemed it important enough to keep. This person I couldn't fully remember wasn't someone random or someone who had a low impact on me. No, they were my best friend from those early years of my life. Passing a stationery shop, I saw cloth-bound books on sale and remembered suddenly that book I had lost as a kid. You know when you forget something for so long and it suddenly comes back? It's a weird nostalgic feeling and temporarily transport you back in time. I remembered how much I loved that book and how cool it would have been to flip through those pages again. I remembered that time with my best friend Isaac where we had traced leaves on several different spreads and made up extravagant names for them all. And that was it. Isaac. I remembered his name, the feelings of fun and play, painting late into the afternoons. He would often wear striped shirts and sweaters, yellow and green most vividly sticking out. I remembered his parents would sometimes pick him up early, which left me feeling a bit lonely without him. I vaguely remembered his face. Dark hair, rounded features, but nothing clear. And that was it. I could not remember a single conversation I'd had with him. This may not seem that weird. You really don't tend to hold many memories from the age of 5, but you have to understand that this was unusual for me. I could remember people I spent way less time with much more clearly, yet I couldn't remember anything else about my best friend? It was an extremely unnerving feeling. It was strange how I completely forgot someone seemingly so important until now. So I did what anyone my age would do and tried to look him up on social media. I didn't have much luck, of course. I only had a name and a rough age, but there was just too many options. So I gave up quickly and moved on to whatever else teenage me was doing. When I was 16, Mum and I were shopping for some clothing for the new school year and I came across a striped shirt and was once again reminded of Isaac. I asked my mum if she could remember his last name, but she didn't seem to even remember him at all. I told her how we'd been inseparable and playing together all the time. She mentioned a few of the other kids, mostly ones with parents she'd kept in contact with, but otherwise, she just shrugged and moved on. I ended up asking my dad, but he had a similar response, even after I mentioned how we had drawn so much in the long-lost book from my grandparents. This time I was a little more invested, driven both out of curiosity but also wanting to prove to my parents. I dug deeper on socials and went through local people who matched the description, hoping he hadn't relocated. I had his age and also info on where he went to kindergarten, of course, but that also didn't help a whole lot. When I had a break from schoolwork or being a social teenager, I would search for him. But still, no luck. Months passed, and after a conversation with a friend about our childhoods, I finally took the step I'd been nervous about and emailed our old kindergarten. It had rebranded a few years after I left, and there was no photo archive or anything on the website. I'm sure we had a physical copy of our graduating class, but that was long packed away somewhere. I sent an email to the one teacher I knew who was still there that was slightly exaggerated, saying that I was doing a project about my childhood and wanted a copy of the graduating class. She responded in a week or so and apparently remembered me, wishing me the best with the photo attached. It was quite poor quality and seemed to be a scan instead of the actual image, but it was better than nothing. There were 22 kids in the photo, my wide-smiling self in the middle row, and in the upper left corner, right up against the edge of the photo, was him. He was in the familiar striped shirt, however the image was blurred just enough that it distorted his features. I felt the hairs on my arm raise as I carefully read each name and the number corresponding it, checking for any duplicates. Even double-checking, there were only 21 names listed. His was the only missing one. To be safe, I checked the others listed in case I had misremembered his name, but I couldn't find anything promising. I emailed my past teacher again, but she wasn't sure. She said it must have been a clerical error. Even after this discovery, he was still lost to me. At this point, I had reached the end of high school and managed to scrape by with passing marks. Instead of staying up late researching what university course I should take, I was instead searching for Isaac. I reversed searched the image to no luck, and I even dug in deeper and looked up every single Isaac in the correct age bracket in my town on Facebook. No luck. I even ended up reaching out to the other people from my kindergarten class to see if they remembered Isaac, but the few who did respond had no idea who I was talking about. My parents could see I was spiraling, especially when I wouldn't go out as much and spent long nights awake at my computer. Eventually, after barely sleeping the night before, I spilled that I was trying to find my friend. They were concerned, of course. At the time, I just couldn't understand why they were so worried for me. It seemed obvious that I had to find this answer. My parents love me, but they would often leave me up to my own devices, so weren't always the best equipped to deal with my mini meltdowns, especially not a large one like this. They suggested I see a psychologist about this obsession, and while I was annoyed at the suggestion, I knew it would keep them off my back, so I agreed to go. The psychologist was fine, and after a few sessions she got me to open up enough to talk about my missing friend. To her credit, she listened to me much better than my parents had, but she also tried to diagnose the problem. She suggested I might have false memories. There is something called misattribution of memory, where a person is unable to properly remember the origin of the memory. Because I was so young and surrounded by many people and introduced to many new things and ideas, the base memory could be false. The person I'm thinking of could have been from a picture, book, or an amalgamation of several of my friends. Once the false memory was there, I simply built upon it each time I thought of it, changing it slightly to outside influences at the time, until it became its own full, seemingly true memory. Looking back now, I can see how logical that sounds. She was also concerned because I was usually so good at remembering people and conversations. The stress of not being able to remember everything now probably attributed to the obsession and anxiety as well. I scoffed at her, but I was certainly intimidated by how logical it sounded. A few sessions later, I became slightly fed up and finally showed her the image I had found. I told her I found it online easily. Even then, I knew to be embarrassed by the lengths I had gone to get the image. Of course, she came back with another perfectly reasonable explanation. She said I could have borrowed someone else's memory without meaning to. Often when we hear stories from others, we can steal parts of it to include in our own stories. Perhaps I had heard a friend talking to me about this person and I had thought I was also friends with them. I understood her point at the time, and I know childhood memories cannot always be trusted, but to me, it felt too real to be someone else's memory. That evening, I deep dived online to see if anyone else had experienced a similar thing to me. There were ideas that memories could be like the ship of Theseus, the paradox of if no pieces of the original made up the preserved ship, was it still the ship of Theseus? Furthermore, if it was no longer the same, when had it ceased existing as the original ship? Even if the original memory was true, after all these years of rethinking them, have I just created something completely different now? Does it still count as my own memory if it's been replaced by outside influences when I brought up that memory time and time again? Eventually, I came across a thread about realities dropping in on themselves, and only certain people could remember certain situations. I went late into the night researching and taking notes. The next morning, I woke, saw the scattered notes on my desk and my messy, unorganized room. Taking a look in the mirror, I saw my pale face and the bags under my eyes, the frown that seemed more natural than a smile. I was horrified. I tore up the pages, deleted bookmarks on my computer, and erasing my history. I remember crying to my parents that day too, and I finally started taking therapy seriously. I was ashamed at what had taken place, but my therapist said it was just an unfortunate situation where everything coincidentally happened in the right way to trigger my fear over losing my memory I could usually rely on. Add in going through high school where you often had to move on from friends or lose touch, and you get a series of unfortunate events. I'm 23 now. It took a while to integrate myself back into the world I used to live in and hanging out with friends carefree. It also took time to trust my memories fully again, but with help and tools I have managed to not hold them so tightly. I'm in university now and actually studying psychology and philosophy after the impact it had on myself. I did a project about the effects of loss on a person and how that mentally changes people. It was a tough paper to write, but it felt cathartic and I got a good grade on it. It did remind me of Isaac again. After studying for the past 2 years, I have moved on from the spiraling obsession teenager me had, and I now have a much better understanding about how the brain works and, more importantly, how it copes. It's made me more confident to say that the solutions my therapist offered were simply band-aids. Yes, they helped me move on and realize I still needed to live and thrive without the worry. But I also know the only true way to solve this problem is with a solution, because I know that Isaac is real and that my memories of him, even hazy, are true. I won't find him overnight, but that's okay. I have time, and I will find him. And that brings us to the end of today's story. I must admit, I'm a little unsure what to say. I'm glad you were able to find support when you needed it, Laura, but it sounds like you can't quite let it go. But maybe that's okay. I'm sure we all have that one thing, that one grudge or idea that we can't let go of for whatever reason. Just make sure you take care of yourself. As many of you know, my cousin Rowan helps with my podcast, especially the tech side. You can't see him, but he's currently waving through the glass between the recording booth. And he can certainly attest to becoming obsessed with something. You should have seen his face when I first suggested taking over this studio with me and starting a show. It was a lot of work, but when I get my hands on something, it is very hard to let go. But anyway, enough from me. This has been another broadcast by Fine Line Station. I'm Charlie Fox, and I'll speak to you next time.